Hi, my name is David Harvey, and I'm a Peninsula College student, and my question is for both candidates. According to a study by Georgetown University, by the year 2020, 2 years from now, 65% of all US jobs will require post-secondary education. Currently, myself and millions of Americans are indebting ourselves just so that we can be part of 65% of the workforce. Will you or will you not support initiatives to guarantee a free, public, 4-year college education as a right to all Americans?
We'll start with Douglas.
Yeah, absolutely not. What's the dropout rate in most technical schools? It's way over 50%. Community colleges have a very high dropout rate too. If we pay for everybody to go to school, it's not going to mean enough to some of the people that are going into school. You have to earn it, you have to go do it. Having loans available is very important. We need to make it so people that are ready to do it can actually do it. But just saying that everybody has another right that's going to cost our society billions, maybe even $1 trillion, is not the way to take care of this problem. It's overstepping the bounds of what government should do. We're responsible for ourselves. We don't have to have everything handed to us. We need to take responsibility for our own lives, and having the government step in and do this is just not what we should be doing as a government.
Derek?
So, first of all, thanks for being here. Listen, not everyone's going to go to college, but I think we recognize that there's some value in providing that door of educational opportunity to more people. I'll say up front, I couldn't have gone to college if it hadn't been for financial aid. I got all of it. I got grants and I got loans, and I washed dishes in the college dining room, which my wife believes is the best skill I learned in college. And frankly, this community stepped up and provided a lot of scholarships to help me pay for college. I think you identify a legitimate problem statement. Student debt has now surpassed credit card debt in this country. And that is absolutely slamming the ability of students to both study things that they want to study, and it's delayed home ownership in this country because people are so overburdened by their student debt. It's even delayed starting businesses and starting families. You've seen a higher number of people moving back in with their parents, which as a parent kind of freaks me out. And so what do we do about it? Well, one, I think the focus should be on middle class and poorer families and providing them with more resources to be able to afford college. I've been a proponent of expanding Pell Grants so that we have Pell Grants keep pace with inflation, so that as tuition costs go up, so does grant-based aid. Two, I have a disagreement with the current administration. They propose pulling the plug on federally subsidized student loans. Here's the value of federally subsidized student loans. It means that if you're a student getting a federal loan, that you don't have to make payments until you're done with school. That's a good thing. It means that you don't start accruing interest until you're done with school. That's a good thing. And so, as your representative, I've stood up and said we should protect those sources of financial aid so more people can go to college without being overburdened by student debt.
Douglas?
Yeah, I mean, I've benefited as much as Representative Kilmer has from our system that exists today. When I was going through the University of Washington in my first degree, I did a work study and I took loans. I am not saying that any of those programs should not be available to people. I just think that we're going way beyond that to say that education is a right. We have to be really careful when we think about, hey, you have a new right. We can't, as a society, take more responsibility away from a person. We both worked really hard. We've taken advantage of what's out there for us to take advantage of. We've made the most out of what society has offered us, what our government has offered us. That's what we need people to do. It doesn't need to be free. You need to say, this is what I want to do. I want to invest in myself and get this education. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to have loans, and I'm going to pay them back. We need to make that decision for ourselves, not expect it to just be free.
Derek?
I just want to mention one other lever within the financial aid portfolio, and that is work study. One of the things that I've been working on is trying to see work study be something other than just cheap labor for the college and university. we've got a proposal that would try to have more work-study placements be in something that could actually lead to a career for a student. So that when they do work-study, they both get that support in helping to pay for their tuition, but they also maybe make a connection with an employer, or maybe they develop a skill that they could use when they enter the workforce. I think there's great value in that, and my hope is that you can see Congress take action on a proposal like that. You bet.
Is there a question over here? I know
There's a couple here.
Yeah, I did. Oh, she's next.
Hi, I'm Eileen Schmitz. I live in Squim, one of the younger residents. I want to thank you both for coming out to the Peninsula today. And Dr. Dightman, I have a question for you. What is your opinion of, and do you support Paul Ryan's proposed voucher system for Medicare?
Sorry, who did you direct it to?
Dr. Dightman?
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know what Paul Ryan's voucher system is for Medicare. I mean, if you want to give me any kind of specific, I'll comment on it. I really just don't know what he's trying to do. Please.
To set more limits on what people can and can't do with Medicare, and to restrict it much more.
Medicare is something that we've all paid into. We knew what we were getting, and we should get what we paid into. If they're trying to restrict it more, that's not okay.
Okay, Derek?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about what we've seen proposed in Congress by Speaker Ryan and by others who think that we should end the Medicare guarantee and instead turn it into a voucher program. I think my concern primarily is driven by the fact that it doesn't pass the My Grandma test. What do I mean by that? Well, what Speaker Ryan has proposed is, rather than giving people a guarantee of Medicare so that their medical costs are covered when they go see a medical provider, he suggests giving them a coupon and having them shop the private insurance market. I'm 44. I think it's complicated to shop the private insurance market. My grandma's 108. When I show her the internet on my phone, she thinks it's the devil. And so, you know, in essence, giving her a coupon and saying, okay, Oma, go shop the private insurance market and try to navigate all these decisions, I think violates the spirit under which Medicare was established in the first place, which is that it was something that people paid into, and they have a right to the medical care that they paid into. And I don't think that Congress should pull the plug on that or pull the rug out from under our seniors.
Response?
Yeah, I would say if the voucher program basically actually guarantees you the same level of care, and the real purpose of it is to try to allow you to go out and choose where you want to get that care, that's great. But I'm hearing two different things is what it's really all about. If the voucher program really is designed to make sure people get the care, having the free market involved with that to get people the most care for the same amount of money, and having corporations and companies compete against each other for the money is a good idea. If that means that they're not going to get the care they need because of the system, then we can't do it. It's just a no-starter.
Derek?
No, I said what I had to say.
Okay. All right. Ms. Vicki?
Vicki Rudin, Port Angeles. The current administration has again raised the specter of privatizing the U.S. Postal Service. I'd like Derek to address this first, because I'd like to know what the sense of Congress is to a suggestion like that, and then I'd like to hear from the other candidate.
Derek?
Well, I want to address your direct question, but it's hard to speak for Congress, right? Because there's 435 members and people are all over the map. I can speak for this member of Congress. I don't support privatizing the Postal Service. I think that's a bad idea. It's particularly a bad idea for rural communities for whom, you know, if there is simply a profit motive, What we would see, I think, in rural communities is less quality service, probably higher cost service. And that's not something I support. There is legislation in Congress to try to address some of the funding shortfalls within the Postal Service. I'm a sponsor of one of those bills. Among other things, right now the biggest driver of the Postal Service's financial problem is the fact that several years back, Congress created a requirement that the Postal Service pre-fund all benefits. Literally, the Postal Service is now having to pay for retirement for people who haven't been born yet, let alone who haven't worked for the Postal Service yet. So it's no wonder, I worked in private industry for years. There's no private company that has an obligation like that, and yet the Postal Service has that obligation. And so from a balance sheet standpoint, that puts them underwater. If you set that aside, their operations are actually in the black. And so my starting point is, what's the problem you're trying to solve by privatizing it? I think privatizing it would create far more problems than it would solve.
Douglas?
Yeah, I actually agree. I think that the Postal Service is something that's very important for our country, to have free flow of information between citizens, between businesses, and that it's part of protecting our free market. So I think privatizing it would be a mistake.
Any additional comments?
The only thing I'll add too is just trying to get at how big a deal this is for people on a number of fronts. So it's a big deal for seniors who might be able to get, whether it be a Social Security check or a prescription in the mail. It's a big deal for local employers who might need supplies through the Postal Service to be able to run their business. And it's even a big deal from the standpoint of just the human interaction that postal carriers provide to the citizens that they serve. I've interacted with a lot of seniors, and it's maybe it shouldn't be surprising to me how often this issue comes up, both around protecting the Postal Service and protecting 6-day delivery. And what often comes up when I hear from seniors is, I really like my post person. It's, I get human interaction with them, and I value that. And I don't think that Congress should pull the plug on that.
Any additions for you, Doug?
No, I think that the Postal Service and the human interaction, of course, is very important. I interact with senior citizens every day, and a lot of times they come to the office, and the main reason is just because they want to touch base and have some interaction with somebody, and that's really crucial for all of us in every stage of our life. So I think that's another benefit of it.
Yeah, I don't see questioners there, so we have a questioner here.
Thank you for coming here. My name's Ron Richards. We've heard tonight, rightfully so, how important Olympic National Park is, and the Puget Sound, and the orcas. Presently, the naval operations out of Whidbey Island are posing a huge risk and a lot of damage to all of these treasures that we have. What will you do, if anything, to get the growlers out of Olympic National Park and to reduce the number of operations on Whidbey Island?
For both candidates?
Yes.
All right, we'll start with Douglas.
I just want to reiterate that I think all of us understand how important these treasures are. I think it's just a difference of opinion on how we think we should go about caring for them in the next hundreds of years. Just to make that clear. I think that the growlers possibly can be made so they're not such an impact. I remember when I was working out in Forks, you could hear them out there, and you would look up and you couldn't see them anywhere. And it was irritating my dogs when they'd run from one end of their yard to the other barking at them. They didn't see them either. I think that we have to try to do something to mitigate the noise, but I don't think that means moving the base somewhere else. We all have to basically have some burden for our national defense, and I think that we need to find the right the right level of burden, and maybe it will require some modifications to the planes so they're not as loud. I don't have any idea where, if we weren't going to have them there, where we'd put them, and I know that the community where we move them to would have the same concerns, so I don't think we could just start moving planes around. We have to find a creative solution, and we have to some degree accept the noise.
Derek?
So let me try to cover 4 things in 2 minutes. One, so these issues, when the Navy or any federal agency is considering something that has an impact like this, that's governed by what's called NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And part of my role as your representative is one, to ensure fidelity to that process, to make sure that decisions are science-based, to make sure that the public has a right to weigh in. So for example, when the comment periods weren't, I think, adequate to allow the public to weigh in, I pushed to extend, succeeding in getting them to extend those comment periods so citizens had a say in the process. There is not a step in the NEPA process that says go get approval or disapproval from your local member of Congress. That's probably a good thing, quite frankly, because I don't think you want these decisions being made by politics. You want them being made based on science. Second, in my role, I've pushed for the Navy to actually increase its interaction with the Park Service. So now that there's a regular interaction between the Park Superintendent and the Naval Base, that's a good thing, because only through that kind of interaction and communication can they look at actions that might both measure sound and mitigate the impact from those Growler flights. 3, I engaged a federal agency that I admit I did not know existed until this issue came up. It's called FICAN, the Federal Interagency Commission on Aircraft Noise. Yep, that exists. And asked them to bring some data to this discussion so that we actually have some understanding of where are these planes flying, how loud are they, what are the other things that are flying over the park, and have some data as part of the conversation. And then finally, this year I was able to secure some funding in the defense budget to look specifically at reducing the sound of these growlers. I think that's important as well, whether that be through mufflers or some other sorts of technology. Hopefully we can see some reduction in sound.
Response, Douglas?
I don't really have much more to add, except for I don't think we've seen any change in the problem. So this may be an example of how the federal government isn't really going to make the changes we need it to do. Maybe we need to start doing something more on a local level. Maybe the state needs to do something. Maybe the county needs to do something. We need to start working on other ways to approach the problem.
Derek?
I think the only thing I would add is the Navy's been a neighbor for a long time. They do important work. All of us, everybody in this room and outside of this room, wants to ensure that our airmen, our pilots are properly trained. But it's important that when the Navy's a neighbor, that it be a good neighbor, and that it take into consideration the concerns of communities like this. I grew up here. I understand that people don't want their summer evenings disrupted by loud noise, and it's part of the reason I've advocated for the process to incorporate the views of the public and as they consider actions like this.
All right, question over here.
Mike Tetro, Port Angeles. I'll leave this kind of open for both of you, and basically just throw out there log exports and mill closures in the area, and your thoughts on that.
Derek?
I got into this job because I grew up here, and I saw the impact of the timber industry decline on our community. And that's absolutely influenced how I've approached this job. One of the things I'm proudest of is that we put together something called the Olympic Forest Collaborative, which was a group of folks from the timber industry and from the conservation community that have worked together to try to identify how do we manage the federal forests in a way that works better for everybody, that enhances forest health, and that increases harvest levels off of the Olympic. And the good news, I can tell you, is that it's working. We actually, last year, saw the highest level of harvest off of the Olympic that we've seen in 2 decades. That's a good thing. Beyond that, I think there's other opportunities for the timber industry, so that we continue, the timber industry has been and will continue to be an important employer here on the peninsula. Some of it may look a little different. So for example, we've looked at trying to spur innovation through mass timber products like cross-laminated timber. In Squim, they built a school building out of cross-laminated timber. We were able to get some language in the military construction bill encouraging the Defense Department to look at these sort of wood-based construction options, again, to create a market and hopefully to provide opportunities for new mills to be built here on the Olympic Peninsula and all around the country.
Douglas?
I think I look at the National Forest actually as being a resource first for the communities in the peninsula. And I think we need to keep that focus. We have the Olympic National Park. It's the jewel. It's where we go if we want to see nature at its finest. But we have to have a good balance between the ability to have our kids raised in the peninsula and controlling the environmental impact. And so the national forests are for resources, they're for jobs, and we need to maximize that as much as we can. And having said that, we need to make sure that we don't transition big portions of the national forest into a more protected status, which is something Representative Kilmer has been sponsoring for a long time, and I think that we just need to avoid doing that. So the national forests are for jobs, and we need to focus on that.
Response, Derek?
I think one of the good things, particularly that we've seen out of the collaborative and as part of some of these other discussions as well, is that we've rejected the false choice between protecting environmentally sensitive areas that need protection and ensuring that there's jobs in other parts of the forest. That's the approach I've taken as your representative, to protect the parts that are environmentally sensitive and to try to increase harvest levels in a responsible way to provide more job opportunities on the peninsula. That'll continue to be my approach.
Douglas, response?
I don't think it matters what the wood product is. The bottom line is we need wood. So the national forests are there to provide that wood. If we can do cross-laminated material, if we can do any other thing to use the resources that we have, we need to use it as maximally as we can. And if there's technologies that come along to let us grow even more economically from the availability of that resource, we need to take advantage of it.
All right, questions? All right. One.
He said it's his second time to the mic.
Oh, that's all right, because that's his second time too. Okay. I was only going to give you one.
Hello again, David Harvey again, Peninsula College student again. Will you or will you not support legislation to bring the United States as a nation in line with the Paris Agreement, which deals with anthropogenic climate change mitigation, adaptation, and finance starting in 2020? Or would you at least support US-specific, science-based legislation that would regulate the greenhouse gas emissions of US corporations?
Both candidates, correct? Okay, Douglas, your turn.
So what I'm going to support is further research in the area of climate change. I don't think that we definitively know whether man is causing all the changes or not. I know that we hear from the media that 97% of all climatologists think that man is making the change. The reality is that's not an accurate statistic, but we can keep saying it over and over and over enough until everybody in this room perhaps believes it's true. We need to do more research and find out how this is impacting us, and then we need to do research and find out how we're going to change it. We don't have the right questions and we don't have the right answers. So the Republican Party wants to say we shouldn't spend any more time looking at climate change. It's just absolutely not there. I mean, my opinion is if it's there, it's a big, big deal and we need to do something about it. So I support keeping an open mind, but I think right now we've moved our open mind to a point where we're just thinking that no matter what we're hearing in the media is actually the way it is. So let's just keep looking at the issue. Let's find out what the science really tells us and then make really good informed decisions.
Derek?
I think climate change is real. I think human beings contribute to it. And I think it's time for politicians to stop kowtowing to the fossil fuels industry and step up and do something about it. Listen, we're already seeing the impacts of climate change. We're seeing them here in our region. I represent 11 Native American tribes, 4 are coastal tribes that, as we sit in this auditorium, are in the process of trying to move to higher ground because of more severe storms and encroaching sea levels, not to mention the threat of tsunami. There are 3,200 people in the district I represent whose jobs are tied to growing shellfish. And they look at this as an existential threat to their livelihoods because you're already seeing changing ocean chemistry that's affecting the ability of oysters to form shells. We saw a forest fire on the, really 10 seconds? Okay, sorry, I got a minute. Will you give me another 10 seconds because I was asking. You know, we saw a forest fire that burned for weeks in the rainforest. I don't know about the rest of you. I've never seen the weather app on my phone have the weather be smoke until the last few years. The Department of Defense says that climate change is a threat multiplier. So the Department of Defense acknowledges that climate change is real and that we should do something about it. I think it's embarrassing that the United States is the only country on the planet that's not party to the Paris Climate Agreement. And I think that we should be a part of it.
Response, Douglas?
Yeah, I think the Paris Climate Agreement is made to try to make a change in the world. I think that we need to decide what is the right change for ourselves. We're responsible for our own livelihood. We're responsible for what we do in the future. We don't need every other country in the world telling us what we should do. We need to take the time, we need to research this issue, we need to find out what is actually happening. And there is scientists at every level on both sides of this issue, despite what we get told on Channel 4 and Channel 5 and CNN. It's there. This is not a definitive thing. Man's effect on the weather is not even at a theory, it's still a hypothesis. The data doesn't even exist to make it a theory. It's not that strong of a link yet. I don't think we should close our eyes to it, but we need to realize that we're not getting the information that we need to get about this.
Response, Derek?
Let me reiterate, I think we should be part of a global solution. It's not America warming, it's global warming. It's climate change is affecting everybody. There are things that we can do at the local, state, and federal level, things like smart grid technology, efforts to look at alternative energy sources that aren't carbon-based, efforts to try to reduce carbon emissions. I think it's a real shame that the current administration has unwound what's called the Clean Power Plan. One of the primary factors in carbon emissions is the production of power, and trying to reduce the carbon emissions associated with that I think makes sense. Trying to reduce the emissions out of our tailpipes makes sense, and I think it's a shame that this administration has tried to wind that back as well. So there are actions that we can take. I actually think our governor put it very well. He said this is the first generation to see the impacts of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it.
All right, question here. Please.
Following up on my previous question, I find it interesting that every time kind of the discussion of timber comes up, the debate always gets shifted to how much timber is available and do we need to cut more in the national forest, et cetera. But my question is really, it's not that there's not enough timber available. When you look at how much, and you do the math and use the numbers that the port provides, there's a lot of logs that are just being exported. There's plenty of logs.
Your question?
But we're not milling them here. So what's the role of the government in keeping those logs here, milling them here, and not shipping them overseas?
Both candidates? All right, we will start with Derek.
I think there's probably a legal question. I mean, you asked about prohibition on log exports. I think, as I've talked to attorneys when this issue's been raised in the past, there's a concern that if there was such a prohibition put in place, it would represent a takings and wouldn't be constitutional. Part of the reason that I discussed the role of the federal lands and our state lands is because there is, on our public lands, a prohibition on the exporting of those logs. And so working to increase the harvest levels in a responsible way off the federal lands does provide opportunities for our local mills.
Douglas?
I mean, I'm going to answer your question as directly as I humanly can. I don't think the government, the federal government, has any role at all in deciding where those logs go once they're cut. I think the federal government should try to make as much money off of those logs as they can to support the programs that they're supposed to pay for. What it requires us to do is say, how can we use those resources that are right in our backyard and make money off of that? There should be some way that we can step up and figure out how we can mill logs here and make money for our communities. I think in Shelton there's a mill there now. I think that they're hired about 25% of people after they laid off almost everybody in the mill, and then they modernized it, and now there's only a quarter of the people there that used to be in the community, but the jobs are higher wage jobs where people are actually making a living, and I think we need to do that. We can't let the government artificially say we're going to have some standard of living because this is our log. We need to focus on making the money we can from the log and then having local ideas, local companies find out how to maximize the fact that that's in our backyard. The government can't do that. The government doesn't know what to do with a log. The government doesn't know how to bring a log to the market that makes the most resources for the community, how many 2x4s it can be turned into. That's private industry, that's local people, that's the way it needs to be dealt with. I don't think the government should be saying there's a quota, this is our resource, we need to maximize our profit from it, and then our communities can figure out how they can make it work for themselves. If the communities have to do that, they will do that. They did it in Shelton.
Response? Derek?
This may be an area of disagreement, I guess, because I support prohibiting the export of logs off of our federal lands. I think those logs should be available for local mills, for public benefit, for local jobs.
Response, Douglas?
I think it's fine. I think it's just an area of disagreement. I think it's, it's people's job to figure out how they're going to make the most of the resource we have, and protecting it that way doesn't make sense. We need to have the encouragement for people to figure out how we're going to maximize the logs, how we're going to use them the best, and we can raise to this challenge. We can do it. Shelton has done it. We just have to do it and not be protected and not be coddled by the government. We have to step forward. We're smart. We're inventive. We can do what we need to do to keep the logs here because that's what makes the most money and makes the most sense for us.
Are there any more questions? Well, there's one and two, all right? We'll do two more questions and then stop questions. You okay with that?
There have been times that you both have disagreed with one another. My first question was on how you would handle politics. So can you both talk to one another so that we can watch you and listen to you? And see how you would handle the disagreements you've had today. I'm guessing you took notes, so maybe you can look through the notes and take it upon yourselves to pick one and to talk about how you're going to work this out, because this is what we did in school.
Okay, I think they've got the idea. And Douglas, it's your turn to start.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'm going to say is, I don't think there's any animosity. Right. Okay, fine. Here, we can do
Yeah,
this.
exactly.
Right. I don't think there's any animosity between me and Derek. I don't feel it. I don't think it's there. I think that we actually have agreements and we have disagreements. And I think the things that we disagree on are the reason we're here. So Derek has 2 wonderful daughters. He has a grandma that was very old. And I'm very glad that our society is here and supports his family. And I'm not surprised, what did I say surprised? I'm very glad that it supports my family too. But we just disagree on some of the ways that we should be moving forward. And that's okay, that's what this is about. If we want to talk about the Seahawks, I'm happy to talk to the Seahawks. I mean, whatever subject you want. But this is part of the issue. This is why we do this, because we don't agree on everything. And I don't feel compelled to actually reach a compromise on the issues that are important to each of us, because it's your job to choose what you feel best represents you.
Derek?
I think that was well put. And I'll add, if you were at our last debate, I offered to carpool with him here. Here's what I will tell you. Our political system was not designed to have everybody agree on everything. That's not how it works. But we've got to get to a point as a society where we can disagree without being disagreeable. I mean, listen, I had one of my colleagues got shot. Steve Scalise got shot. Gabby Giffords got shot. You know, we have got to dial down the level of toxicity in our political system. And beyond that, we have to actually figure out how to move forward on the things on which we agree, which is why I think people are genuinely frustrated with our current politics, because there's too many things where Democrats and Republicans actually agree with each other. And those are stuck in the garage too, not able to make it to the finish line. I've mentioned a couple times, I participate in this group called the Bipartisan Working Group, and it's kind of a meeting in 3 parts. The first part of the meeting, we go around the room, and anybody who's working on something where they want to invite collaboration or co-sponsorship, they get an opportunity to make a pitch. Second part of the meeting, we talk about what's going on in Congress that week. And those can get feisty, right? If you're talking about healthcare or immigration or some of the issues we talked about tonight, people can get sharp elbows. But I'm increasingly of the belief that good democracy is a little bit like a good marriage. You know, you don't necessarily agree with each other on everything, but you got to be able to talk to each other and listen to each other and not impugn one another's motives and respect where you're coming from. And the third part of the meeting, we talk about big, hairy issues facing the country and how we might be able to find some common ground on those issues. Now, I don't want to mislead you into thinking we're sitting around the table holding hands and singing Kumbaya or closing our eyes and doing trust falls into each other's arms. We stopped doing that after we dropped a guy. But I will tell you, every time I walk out of that room, I find myself thinking, we got to do more of this as a country. We've got to be able to interact with one another. Not just in our, not just folks who are running for office, all of us need to be able to interact with each other.
In the spirit of the question, do either of you have more to say to each other?
I'm just going to say that we need a change in the way Congress works. We have roles in Congress that are not constitutionally based, and we have a party that has absolute control. And we need to think about doing something where if 40% of the people in Congress are co-sponsoring a bill, it gets voted on. It's not up to the Rules Committee to say, no, it doesn't get voted on. We're not even going to let it get through committee. We need to take that away because we're dangerously close to an oligarchy instead of a republic. And I know Derek has been really frustrated at sometimes in his Washington, D.C. because he hasn't been able to get things acted on that are common sense that people would agree on, and because of leadership. And we need to think about how are we going to change the leadership. And I'm just going to leave it at that.
Derek?
Yeah, I mentioned previously, and I really do encourage everyone to look, you can Google it when you get home, something called the Break the Gridlock Package that is focused on trying to change the rules of Congress to address some of these problems so that the committees do what they were designed to do, which is actually to deliberate on bills and to amend bills and actually consider these things in a more thoughtful way. Listen, Congress under the current approach is voting on stuff that never even got a hearing. That's not the way this is supposed to work. There are bills that have broad bipartisan support, have never even gotten a vote. And I think that's where, listen, it's weird. I haven't been doing this all that long. It's weird for me to be part of an organization that, according to recent polling, is less popular than head lice, colonoscopies, and Justin Bieber. And it's part of the reason I'm as committed as I am to trying to reform how Congress works and to have a Congress that's working on behalf of the American people, not just participating in partisan bickering.
Our last question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Dightman, it appears that you are in the camp of people who believe that there is not yet enough research to prove that anthropogenically accelerated climate change is a for sure thing. So, to your point, I would argue that I get quizzed on that very research here in this institution. It's in textbooks. But in the absence of that research right now, would you, if elected, support legislation to specifically fund, separate from the National Science Foundation, the work of climate scientists to prove once and for all that anthropogenically accelerated climate change is real?
Douglas.
I'll fund money to prove that it's either real or not real. I mean, you just restated that it's real. You're not even being really honest with your question. I said before that we need to get to the bottom of the issue. We need to figure out what the right answer is. So that's what I will do, and that's what I've said I'll do.
You will fund the research.
I'll fund the research. There's no reason not to fund the research. The Republican Party, and part of its platform says we shouldn't even be acknowledging this anymore. It's just simply wrong. If it's happening, it's a huge issue, and we need to know whether it's happening or not. Right now, the science, in my mind, isn't there to convince me yet. And
It's
so,
in the textbook right over there.
well, I can give you 100 different textbooks for the one you give me. That's just a silly thing to say. I mean, yeah.
Okay, Derek, you'd like to respond?
I don't know that I have all that much more to add from what I said previously. I think climate change is real, and I think it's time to take action. I'm against defunding climate science. I'm against removing the words climate change from federal agency websites. And I think, again, we all should have a sense of urgency on taking action on this.
Douglas, you want to add any?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to say that, this is an important issue, but there's so much politics involved in this. I mean, the Democratic Party doesn't consider hydroelectric power renewable. I mean, there's ridiculous views on this on both sides. And so we need to open back up our minds, step away from the politics of this, and just take a really good look at it.
Any more, Derek?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, for such a small group, you were dynamite. I hope that I might forget closing statements. It's very nice that this is video because there's an opportunity for you to tell people, and both you candidates, to tell people to go on the league website and watch the debate and get the information. All right. Well, you held up well. And it's time for your closing statements. To end the panel, we'll allow each candidate 3 minutes for a closing statement. And we will reverse the order from the opening statement and begin with Douglas Dightman.
So I think that there's probably no one in this room that agrees with everything I've said today. And there never will be anybody that honestly agrees with everything someone else says, because we all have to look out for ourselves and our families and our loved ones first. That's the first thing that we do as human beings. The second thing we do is we reach out and we figure out what we think is best for the people around us. And that's what politics is all about. We have differences about what we think is best for the people around us. I think that the government should, as much as possible, not be making those decisions for people. We should let people at the lowest level do that. We should let people in towns do that, in counties do that. And so my biggest point of view is that we need to keep money from flowing to Washington, D.C. We need to bring money back to our local communities where we feel passionate about decisions and be able to do it here. I think we're just heading in the wrong direction. And the reason I'm running is because I want to represent the other point of view, the point of view that we go to Washington, D.C. for specific reasons, which is to protect our national defense and protect the free market and protect people's ability to participate in the free market. So we need strong education programs. We need fairness between men and women. Those are all very important things. But the bottom line is we need to take more personal responsibility for all of those things in our life and not depend on the federal government to do it for us. That includes education as well. Education is not a right. It's something that we have to work hard and earn. And we should make it easy for people to do it when they decided it's the right thing for them to do. So there's a clear difference between me and Representative Kilmer. I'm excited about receiving some of the people's votes in this room if you have the same vision. My vision is different, and I think it's time for something that's a little bit different. And if you're agreeing with me, that's great. Let's make some changes.
Derek Kilmer.
So before we go, I'd like to say I look at this as a job. I look at a campaign kind of like a job interview process. So let me tell you why I hope you rehire me. First, it's one thing to talk about jobs. It's another to actually have a record of doing something about jobs. I spent a decade working in economic development professionally, in part because I grew up here and saw what happened when we saw a downturn in our economy. When I served in the state legislature, I passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill that created 18,000 jobs in this state. I'm proud of the fact that the Washington Economic Development Association recognized me 3 times for the leadership that I've shown on economic development issues. As your congressman, I've focused on jobs, whether that be working on rural broadband or working on the Olympic Forest Collaborative or working to protect Fairchild Airport here in Port Angeles or working to help our small businesses. I've been all about jobs. And I'm proud of the fact that the National Retail Federation named me a hero of Main Street for my work in that regard. It's one thing to talk about our military families and our veterans. It's another to have a record of doing something on their behalf. I look at it as a solemn honor to serve more military veterans than almost any member of Congress. And I'm glad that AMVETS gave me their Silver Helmet Award for my efforts on behalf of those who've served our country. I think if you serve this country, we ought to have your back. I'm proud of the fact that the U.S. Navy gave me their Distinguished Public Service Award for my work on behalf of military families. It's one thing to talk about bipartisanship, it's another to actually be bipartisan. I'm proud to be the co-chair of the Bipartisan Working Group and a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus. According to GovTrack and the Lugar Center, I'm one of the most bipartisan members of the U.S. House. But listen, don't take my word for it. You can check my references. I'm proud to be endorsed by folks all across the political spectrum, by groups like the Conservation Voters and the Labor Council. I'm proud that an article in the Washington Post named me as one of the 5 most effective Democrats in the U.S. House. I'm proud to have been endorsed by the Tacoma News Tribune. And when they endorsed me, though they called me both wonky and nerdy, which kind of hurt my feelings, that they applauded my interest in fiscal responsibility and my efforts to work across the aisle. Listen, I'm not done working to get our economy on track. I'm not done working to get this Congress on track, and that's why I'm here to ask for your vote. I'm proud to have grown up here in Port Angeles. I'm very grateful for the support that I've gotten from this community, and I continue to ask for your support. Thanks, everybody.
Before you all leave, I would like you to allow me to first thank our candidates and then a few remarks. So on behalf of the League of Women Voters and the Peninsula College Associated Students, we thank you for coming and giving us this opportunity. A plug, again.
All right.
Okay, firstly, are there any any candidates running for other offices in this group to introduce themselves? No? Okay. I want special thanks to our timers. That was a big job tonight. You did great. And the candidates did pretty good. And thanks to the Student Council for being good partners. We'll be very happy with you. For those, remember to tell everyone about, they can see this forum on the league website. Remember that Monday, October 29th is the last day to change your address or register in person at the Clallam County Auditor's offices. Ballots were mailed today, and your marked ballot must be placed in a drop box and postmarked no later than November 6th. Ballots now have prepaid postage, so you don't even need to buy a stamp. Please remind your families, friends to cast their votes as well. Let's improve that turnout. Let's get well over 50%. Let's try for 95%.
100%.
Well, that too, that would be a good goal. I also want to tell you, the League of Women Voters of Washington has developed a new resource that will help you make ballot decisions. It's called vote411.org. It's nonpartisan online voter guide. All candidates have been encouraged to post their answers. I'm assuming these candidates have done that. On issues facing their local communities, you can pick up your vote411.org bookmark at the league membership table. And remember, there's copies of summaries of the 4 ballot initiatives if you would like more information on them. Visit our membership table, pick up your bookmark, consider joining. It's open to everybody, men too. Donations are also welcome. That's what finances our ability to continue to offer these forums. That's it. Vote. Thank you, and have a good night.
All right.